fat she is. She's so large. Yeah, so fat and large. She's so large.
The marketplace smelled of roasted plantains and fresh palm oil. Timmy moved between the stalls, her wrapper swaying with each step, her basket balanced perfectly on her head. She stopped at Mama Kemi's stall to buy yams, and the old woman smiled warmly at her. "Timmy, my daughter, you have such a kind spirit. May the gods bless you." Timmy's laughter rang out like bells, warm, genuine, unguarded. "Thank you, Mama, and may they bless you too." But as she turned to leave, she heard it. The whispers. Look at her size, moving like she owns the world. If only she knew how people see her. Such a shame. Pretty face, but that body. The words stung like pepper in an open wound. Timmy kept walking, her smile fading just a little. She had heard these whispers all her life, from strangers, from neighbors, sometimes even from family. She was not slim like the other girls. Her arms were full, her hips wide, her belly soft. In a village that celebrated slender waists and delicate frames, Timmy's body was a topic of conversation, and not the kind that made her feel seen. But Timmy had something else. She had a heart that felt deeply. She noticed when the widow down the road needed firewood. She shared her meals with children who had none. She sang to comfort the sick and danced to celebrate the joyful. Still, none of that seemed to matter when people looked at her. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, the town crier's drum echoed across the village. Bam, bam, bam. Everyone stopped. The crier's voice boomed across the dusty paths. Hear ye, the king has spoken. In 1 moon's time, there will be a grand festival. His Majesty seeks a new queen. All maidens of age are invited to the palace. The village erupted. Mothers shrieked with excitement. Young girls clutched each other's hands, their eyes wide with dreams of royalty. Even the elders nodded approvingly. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. But in the corner of her small compound, Timmy sat quietly, staring at the red dust beneath her feet. Could she dare to dream such a dream? Her aunt's sharp voice cut through her thoughts like a machete through sugarcane. "Timmy, I know what you are thinking, and the answer is no." Timmy looked up. Her aunt stood in the doorway, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Auntie, I haven't said anything." "You don't need to say it. I can see it in your eyes." Her aunt stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Listen to me, child. That festival is not for girls like you. Do you want to be the laughingstock of this entire kingdom? Do you want to disgrace this family?" Timmy's throat tightened. "But the invitation was for all maidens. All maidens who have a chance," her aunt snapped. "Look at yourself, Timmy. The king will choose someone beautiful, someone graceful, someone smaller." The word hung in the air like smoke. Timmy lowered her head, but something inside her refused to break. "I am worthy," she whispered. Her aunt scoffed. "Worthy of what? Mockery?" But Timmy didn't answer, because deep down, beneath all the shame and all the whispers, there was a quiet, stubborn voice that refused to be silenced. You are more than what they see. And for the first time in her life, Timmy decided to listen to it. The days that followed were a frenzy of preparation. Every household with a daughter of age became a training ground. Mothers backed orders like generals preparing for war. Girls practiced their walks, slow, graceful, hips swaying like river reeds in the wind. They rehearsed their smiles in cracked mirrors and perfected their greetings until their tongues ached. Straighten your back, soften your eyes, don't laugh too loud. Royalty doesn't cackle like a market woman. Timmy watched it all from a distance. She had no mother to train her. Her mother had died when she was young, leaving her in the care of her aunt, a woman whose love came with conditions Timmy could never seem to meet. Still, Timmy decided she would go. Not because she thought she would win, but because something in her heart told her she deserved to try. She saved every coin she earned from selling vegetables. She bought fabric, not the finest, but clean and bright. She borrowed beads from a kind neighbor who didn't ask too many questions. The night before the festival, Timmy sat alone in her room, sewing the final stitches into her wrapper by candlelight. Her hands trembled. What if they laughed at her? What if her aunt was right? But then she remembered Mama Kemi's words. You have a kind spirit. She remembered the children who ran to her in the marketplace begging for stories. She remembered the way she felt when she helped someone in need, like she mattered. I am going, she whispered to the flickering flame, not to win, but to show myself that I am brave. And with that, she blew out the candle and tried to sleep. The morning of the festival arrived with the rising sun painting the sky gold and crimson. The courtyard had been transformed. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze. Drummers sat in rows, their hands poised over taut animal skins. The air smelled of incense and roasted meat. The crowd gathered early, buzzing with anticipation. And the maidens? Oh, the maidens. They arrived like a parade of goddesses. Slim waists wrapped in the finest silk, necks adorned with coral beads that glittered in the sunlight, skin oiled until it gleamed like polished bronze. They moved with rehearsed elegance, each step a performance, each smile a calculated charm. The crowd cheered. Look at that one, like a gazelle. That girl there, she walks like water flowing. The king will have a hard time choosing. And then Timmy arrived. She stepped into the courtyard quietly, her wrapper modest but clean, her beads simple but dignified. She had braided her hair herself, woven with care but without the elaborate decorations the other girls wore. She took her place in line, and that's when it started. A giggle, then another, then a loud, mocking laugh. Is she serious? Did she lose a bet? Someone should tell her this is a queen selection, not a food tasting ceremony. The laughter spread like wildfire. Some of the other maidens turned to look at her, their eyes wide with disbelief. A few whispered behind their hands. Others didn't bother to hide their amusement. Timmy's chest tightened. Her breath came shallow. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to turn around, to disappear into the crowd and never look back. But her feet stayed planted. She lifted her chin. She would not give them the satisfaction of her shame. From his throne, the king sat in silence, watching everything. His face revealed nothing, but his eyes were sharp, observant, seeing more than the crowd realized. The ceremony began. One by one, the maidens were called forward to introduce themselves. They curtsied low, spoke in soft, honeyed voices, and retreated with graceful steps. The crowd clapped. The drummers played. The energy was electric. And then it was Timmy's turn. The announcer called her name. The laughter swelled again. Timmy stepped forward. Her legs felt heavy. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the entire courtyard could hear it. But she kept walking. She stopped before the king, lowered herself into a respectful bow, and spoke. Your Majesty, my name is Timmy. I come not because I believe I am the most beautiful. I come because I believe I am worthy of standing here. Silence. The king's gaze held hers for a long moment. Then he nodded once. You may return to your place. Timmy bowed again and stepped back in line. Behind her, she had the whispers resume, but this time she didn't flinch. She had done it. She had stood before a king, and she had not broken. But just as Timmy began to breathe again, just as the ceremony seemed to settle back into its rhythm, a sound pierced the air. A scream, sharp, terrified, desperate, and everything changed. The scream came from the center of the courtyard. Heads snapped toward the ceremonial fire pit, where dancers had been performing moments before, leaping and twirling in time with the drums, their movements honoring the ancestors. But now the music had stopped, and in the chaos, a small figure stumbled. A child, no more than 4 years old, dressed in a tiny embroidered tunic, had wandered too close to the flames during the excitement. His foot caught on the edge of a woven mat, and he tumbled forward, directly toward the roaring fire. The crowd gasped in unison. Time seemed to slow. The child's arms flailed. His eyes went wide with terror. The flames licked upward, hungry and merciless, only a breath away from his small body. "Someone help him!" a woman screamed, but no one moved. The beautifully dressed maidens, those same girls who had walked with such confidence, who had smiled so perfectly, stood frozen. Some stepped back, clutching their expensive wrappers, as if they feared a single ash would ruin them. Others covered their mouths in horror, but didn't move. A few turned away, unable to watch. Fear held them captive. Fear of the fire, fear of ruining their appearance, fear of failing in front of the king. But Timmy didn't think about any of that. She only saw the child. She only heard his cry. And something inside her, something deeper than fear, stronger than shame, took over. She ran. Her heavy footsteps pounded against the dusty ground. Her wrapper flapped wildly around her legs. The beads around her neck clattered and bounced. People shouted, "Stop! It's too dangerous! You'll get burnt!" But Timmy didn't stop. She pushed through the crowd, shoving aside those who stood in her way. The heat of the fire hit her face like a slap, but she didn't flinch. She reached the edge of the pit. The child was teetering on the brink, his small hands grasping at nothing, his face twisted in terror. Timmy didn't hesitate. She lunged forward, her arms outstretched, and grabbed the child by his waist. She yanked him backward with all her strength, pulling him away from the flames just as they surged upward in a violent burst. The force of her movement sent them both tumbling to the ground. Timmy's wrapper caught on a burning log. The edge of the fabric singed and smoked. The smell of scorched cloth filled her nostrils. But the child was safe. He was crying, sobbing into her chest, but he was alive. Timmy held him tightly, her own breath ragged, her heart hammering against her ribs. The courtyard fell silent. Not the polite silence of a ceremony, but the heavy, breathless silence of shock. Slowly, Timmy looked up. Every eye was on her. The crowd, the maidens, the elders, and the king. He had risen from his throne. His face was no longer unreadable. It was filled with something Timmy couldn't quite name: concern, respect, and something else: recognition. An elderly woman broke through the crowd, her face pale with fear. "My grandson!" she cried, rushing toward Timmy. "You saved my grandson!" She fell to her knees beside Timmy, pulling the child into her arms, tears streaming down her face. The king's advisor stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Your Majesty, that child, he is your sister's son, your nephew." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Timmy's eyes widened. She hadn't known. She hadn't ought to ask. She had simply acted. The king descended the steps of his throne slowly, deliberately. His royal robes swept the ground as he walked toward her. The crowd parted like water. Timmy tried to stand, but her legs felt weak. Her hands were trembling now, their adrenaline draining away, leaving only exhaustion and the sting of minor burns on her arms. The king stopped in front of her. He looked down at her. This girl the crowd had mocked, this girl they had laughed at, this girl they had dismissed. And then he knelt. The entire courtyard gasped. A king did not kneel, not for anyone, but he did. He reached out and gently helped Timmy to her feet. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Timmy, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Timmy," he repeated. "Do you know what you have done?" She shook her head, unable to find words. "You have shown me something I have been searching for, something I did not think I would find today." He turned to face the crowd, and when he spoke again, his voice was firm, unshakable. "You laughed at her body." The words cut through the air like a blade. Some of the crowd lowered their heads in shame. "You mocked her. You whispered. You judged." The king's eyes swept over the assembled maidens, the nobles, the villagers. But when danger came, when my own blood was in peril, it was not beauty that moved. He paused. It was courage. The silence was deafening. The king turned back to Timmy, and slowly, deliberately, he removed the royal bracelet from his own wrist. The bracelet,
the symbol of queenship. The entire kingdom knew what it meant. "No," someone whispered in the crowd, but the king ignored them. He took Timmy's trembling hand and placed the bracelet on her wrist. The gold was heavy, warm, real. Timmy stared at it, unable to comprehend what was happening. "I am not choosing a body," the king declared, his voice ringing out across the courtyard. "I am choosing a heart strong enough to protect a kingdom." And with those words, everything Timmy had ever known shattered and rebuilt itself in an instant. But the story was far from over, because the same people who had laughed now wore expressions of disbelief, and in the shadows, envious eyes were already plotting.
The coronation happened swiftly. Within days, Timmy, the girl who had been mocked in the marketplace, the girl her own aunt had told to stay home, stood in the palace temple draped in royal cloth. The priestess anointed her head with sacred oil. The drums thundered. The people chanted, "Long live Queen Timmy! Long live the Queen!" But not everyone chanted with joy. In the crowd, faces twisted with bitterness. The maidens who had competed stood stiff and silent, their dreams of reality now ashes. Some wept, others glared. Timmy's aunt stood near the back, her expression unreadable, caught between pride and the shame of having doubted her own niece. And in the corridors of the palace, the king's council whispered among themselves, "A queen chosen from courage, not lineage? What kind of precedent does this set? She is unconventional." The word hung in the air like a curse. Unconventional. It was a polite way of saying, not what we expected, not what we wanted. But the king had made his choice, and his word was law. That first night in the palace, Timmy could not sleep. She sat by the window of her new chamber, staring out at the kingdom that now looked to her as their queen. The room was vast. The bed was softer than anything she had ever known. Silk curtains billowed gently in the night breeze. But all Timmy felt was the weight of the crown, the weight of expectation, the weight of all the eyes that still doubted her. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. The door opened, and the king stepped inside. He was no longer dressed in his ceremonial robes. He wore a simple tunic, his expression gentle. "You are not sleeping," he observed. Timmy shook her head. "I cannot, Your Majesty." "Please," he said, sitting across from her. "When we are alone, call me Adebayo." She blinked. "That feels improper." He smiled faintly. "You are my queen now. There is no impropriety in addressing me by my name." Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken things. "Why did you choose me?" Timmy finally asked, her voice barely over a whisper. Adebayo looked at her for a long moment. "Because," he said slowly, "I have been surrounded by beauty all my life. I have been offered grace and elegance and charm, but none of it meant anything." He leaned forward, his gaze steady. "When I saw you run towards that fire, when I saw you risk yourself without hesitation, I saw something I had been searching for. I saw a queen who would not stand by when her people were in danger. I saw a heart that leads with action, not words." Timmy's eyes filled with tears. "But I do not look like a queen." "You look exactly like a queen," Adebayo said firmly, "because a queen is not measured by her waist or her height. She is measured by the strength of her spirit." He stood and moved to the window beside her. "This kingdom has known beauty. It has known wealth, but it has also known hardship. And when hardship comes, it is not elegance that saves us. It is courage. It is sacrifice. It is love." He turned to her. "You have all of that, Timmy, and more." For the first time since the ceremony, Timmy allowed herself to believe it, just a little. But belief was fragile, and the challenges came swiftly. The next morning, Timmy attended her first council meeting. The elders sat in a semicircle, their faces lined with age and authority. They spoke of trade routes, of disputes between villages, of preparations for the harvest festival. Timmy listened carefully, trying to absorb everything. When there was a pause, she spoke. "Forgive me, but I have a question." The room fell silent. One of the elder councilmen, a man named Chief Okonko, raised an eyebrow. "Yes, Your Majesty." "I heard that the northern villages are struggling with water shortages. Have we sent aid?" Chief Okonko's expression tightened. "That is a matter we are still deliberating."
Still deliberating? Timmy repeated. But it has been weeks, has it not? If people are thirsty, why do we wait? Another councilman cleared his throat. Your Majesty, these decisions require careful consideration. We must balance resources, ensure we do not deplete our own reserves. But they are our people, Timmy interrupted gently. Should we not help them first and deliberate later? The tension in the room was palpable. Chief Okonko's jaw clenched. With all due respect, Your Majesty, governance is more complex than simple compassion. Timmy met his gaze steadily. Perhaps, she said softly, but compassion is where governance should begin. The king, who had been silent until now, nodded slowly. The queen is right, he said. Send water to the northern villages immediately. The council murmured among themselves but did not argue. As the meeting ended and the elders filed out, Timmy caught the look Chief Okonko gave her. It was not respect, it was resentment. And she knew in that moment that her greatest battles would not be fought with swords. They would be fought with words, with decisions, with the constant need to prove that she belonged. But she also knew something else. She would not back down, because she had not survived mockery, fire and doubt just to be silent now. The real test had only just begun, and the kingdom was watching.
3 months into her reign, Timmy had learned that being queen was far more difficult than she had imagined. Every decision was scrutinized, every word was weighed, every action was judged, not just by what it accomplished, but by who it came from. A woman the court still whispered about when they thought she couldn't hear. She is too soft. She does not understand politics. She is a commoner playing dress-up. But Timmy pressed on. She walked through the villages, listening to the people's concerns. She sat with the farmers and learned about their struggles. She visited the sick and the elderly, bringing comfort where she could. The common people loved her, but the nobles grew increasingly uneasy. Then came the drought. It started slowly, a few weeks without rain. Nothing unusual for the dry season, but the weeks turned into a month, then 2. The wells began to run low. Crops withered in the fields, livestock grew thin. The council convened urgently. We must ration the palace reserves, Chief Okonko declared. The royal household cannot afford to deplete its resources for the common people. If we give too much away now, we will have nothing left when the drought worsens. Timmy sat in her chair, listening, her hands folded in her lap. How much water do we have in the palace reserves? Chief Okonko asked. The treasurer consulted his records. Enough to sustain the royal household and the guards for 6 months, Your Majesty, perhaps longer if we are careful. And the villages? Silence. The villages have perhaps a few weeks, the treasurer admitted quietly. Timmy's chest tightened. Then we will share, she said. Chief Okonko's head snapped up. Your Majesty, that is unwise. We will share, Timmy repeated, her voice firm. Open the palace reserves, distribute water to the villages, ration it carefully, but ensure that no one goes without. But Your Majesty, another councilman protested, if the drought continues, the palace itself may run dry. Then we will run dry together, Timmy said quietly. I will not sit in comfort while my people suffer. The king, seated beside her, placed a hand gently on hers. He did not speak, but his touch said, I am with you. The council had no choice but to obey. The water was distributed. At first, the people rejoiced. They blessed Queen Timmy's name, calling her merciful, compassionate, the mother of the kingdom. But as the drought dragged on and the palace reserves dwindled, whispers began to spread. She has doomed us all. What happens when there is nothing left? The king should have married a woman with sense, not just a kind heart. Even among those she had helped, doubt crept in. And in the palace, the tension grew unbearable. One evening, Chief Okonko confronted her directly. Your Majesty, he said, his voice cold and measured. Your compassion is admirable, but compassion without wisdom is recklessness. You have put this entire kingdom at risk. Timmy looked at him, her face calm but her heart pounding. I have put my faith in the people, she said, and in the belief that we will endure this together. Faith does not fill wells, Chief Okonko said sharply. Faith does not feed children. No, I agree, but unity does, sacrifice does, and I would rather face this drought as one kingdom than watch half of it die while the other half hoards what little we have. Chief Okonko's eyes narrowed. You are naive. Perhaps, Timmy said softly, but I would rather be naive and compassionate than wise and cruel. Chief Okonko said nothing more, but as he left, Timmy saw it clearly in his eyes. He was waiting for her to fail. They all were.
That night, Timmy knelt alone in the palace temple. She lit a candle and closed her eyes, her lips moving in silent prayer. Ancestors, if you hear me, if I have made the wrong choice, show me, guide me. I do not want to lead this kingdom to ruin, but I cannot. I will not turn my back on those who need me. The flame flickered, and in the silence, she felt no answer, only the weight of her decision pressing down on her like stones. She returned to her chamber exhausted and found the king waiting for her. "You are troubled," he said. She nodded, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "What if they are right?" she whispered. "What if I have made a terrible mistake?" Adebayo sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "Do you regret your decision?" he asked gently. Timmy thought for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "Even if we suffer for it, I cannot regret choosing compassion." Adebayo smiled faintly. "Then you have not made a mistake," he said. "A leader who acts from fear will always fail, but a leader who acts from love, even if the path is hard, will always find the way forward." Timmy leaned her head against his shoulder, drawing strength from his presence. "I hope you are right," she whispered. "So do I," he admitted quietly. And together they waited for the rains. But the rains did not come. Not the next day, not the next week, and as the final reserves dwindled to nearly nothing, the kingdom held its breath, wondering if their queen's courage had saved them or doomed them. The sun rose on the 100th day of the drought. The kingdom was silent. Not the peaceful silence of contentment, but the hollow silence of desperation. The wells were nearly empty. The rivers had become trickles of mud. Even the palace reserves, once abundant, were down to the last barrel. Timmy stood in the courtyard, staring at the cloudless sky. Her body felt heavy with exhaustion. She had not slept well in weeks. Every night, she lay awake wondering if she had led her people to ruin. Behind her, she heard footsteps. It was Chief Okonkwo, flanked by 2 other council members. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice cold, "the council has convened. We must speak with you." Timmy turned to face him, her expression calm despite the storm brewing inside her. "Speak, then." Chief Okonkwo stepped forward, his face grim. "The people are suffering, the reserves are gone, and still no rain." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The council believes it is time for you to step down." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Step down," she repeated quietly. "You have led with your heart, Your Majesty, but a kingdom cannot survive on heart alone. We need a leader who understands strategy, restraint, someone who can make the hard choices." "I made the hard choice," Timmy said, her voice trembling but firm. "I chose to suffer with my people instead of above them." "And look where it has brought us," Chief Okonkwo said coldly, "to the brink of collapse." Timmy's hands clenched at her sides. But before she could respond, a voice rang out across the courtyard. "Enough!" The king emerged from the palace, his expression thunderous. "You dare speak to your queen this way?" Adebayo's voice was low but lethal. "Your Majesty, I speak only out of concern for the kingdom." "You speak out of fear," the king interrupted, "and fear makes cowards of even the wisest men." He walked to Timmy's side and took her hand. "My wife chose compassion when the rest of you chose caution. She chose unity when you chose division. And whether the rains come or not, she has shown this kingdom what true leadership looks like." Chief Okonkwo's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The king's gaze swept over the council. "If you wish to challenge her authority, you challenge mine as well, and I will not stand for it." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Chief Okonkwo bowed low. "As you wish, Your Majesty." But Timmy could see it in his eyes. This was not over. That afternoon, Timmy walked through the village alone. She saw mothers holding crying infants. She saw children with hollow eyes. She saw farmers staring at cracked, barren earth. And she felt the weight of it all crushing her. She stopped at the village well and sat on the edge, her head in her hands. "Have I failed them?" she whispered to no one. "No, my queen." Timmy looked up. It was Mama Kemi, the old woman from the marketplace, the one who had always been kind to her. Mama Kemi sat beside her, her weathered hand resting gently on Timmy's shoulder. "You have not failed us," the old woman said softly. "You have given us something far greater than water." "What could be greater than water when people are dying of thirst?" Timmy asked, tears slipping down her cheeks. Hope, Mama Kemi said simply. You have shown us that we are not alone, that our queen does not sit in her palace and forget us. You have suffered with us, and that, my child, is worth more than you know. Timmy wept then, her shoulders shaking. Mama Kemi held her like a mother would, whispering blessings and prayers. And as the sun began to set, Timmy felt something shift inside her. She had done everything she could. Now she had to trust. Trust in the people, trust in the ancestors, trust in something greater than herself. That night, the kingdom gathered in the palace courtyard for what might be the last ceremony of Queen Timi's reign. The council had called for a public trial of her leadership. The people came in droves, some out of anger, some out of curiosity, and some out of loyalty. Timi stood before them all, her head held high. Chief Okonkwo addressed the crowd. People of Adebayo, we stand at a crossroads. Our queen chose to give away our reserves, and now we face the consequences. The question before us is simple. Do we continue to follow a queen who leads with compassion but no strategy, or do we demand new leadership? Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But before anyone could respond, a small voice called out, "She saved my life." The crowd turned. It was the child, the king's nephew, the boy Timi had pulled from the fire. He stepped forward, his small hand clutching his grandmother's. "She didn't have to save me. She could have stayed safe, but she didn't. She ran into the fire for me." Another voice joined in. "She gave us water when the wells ran dry. She sat with my mother when she was sick. She listened to us when no one else would." One by one, voices rose from the crowd. Farmers, mothers, children, elders, all speaking of the ways Timi had touched their lives. Chief Okonkwo's expression darkened, but he could not silence them. And then, just as the testimonies reached their peak, a sound, distant at first, then louder, thunder. The crowd fell silent. Everyone looked up. The sky, which had been clear and merciless for 100 days, was now dark with clouds. And then rain. A single drop fell on Timi's face, then another, and suddenly the heavens opened. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching the courtyard, filling the wells, soaking the parched earth. The people erupted in joy. They danced, they wept, they lifted their faces to the sky and laughed. Timi stood in the center of it all, rain streaming down her face, her heart full to bursting. The king walked to her and pulled her into his arms. "You did it," he whispered. "No," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "We did it, all of us." And as the rain continued to fall, Chief Okonkwo stood in the shadows, watching, defeated. Years passed. The drought became a distant memory, replaced by seasons of abundance. Queen Timi ruled not with fear or force, but with compassion and courage. She built schools for the children. She established councils where even the poorest villagers could voice their concerns. She ensured that the palace doors were always open to those in need. And the people loved her. Not because she was the most beautiful, not because she was the most elegant, but because she was theirs. She had stood with them in their suffering. She had chosen unity over self-preservation, and she had proven that true royalty is not measured by appearance, but by the strength of one's heart. The kingdom of Adebayo prospered under her reign, and her story was told for generations, a reminder that the world may laugh at what it does not understand, but courage, compassion, and character will always rise above. If this story touched your heart, share it. Let it remind someone else that they are worthy too. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this, they change lives, and I want to keep sharing them with you.